Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of Purple Insider presented by FanDuel. Matthew Coller here inside my hotel room at the NFL owners meetings in Phoenix. First, we're going to bring you a conversation with myself and Alec Lewis, breaking down everything that Kevin O'Connell had to say here at the owners meetings. And then I'll answer some of your questions now that we've heard from the head coach, the general manager, and the owner. So let's get to that conversation first, and then we'll hear from you after that.
Well, I don't think he's gotten enough credit for, playing in rhythm. Some of those plays, we all recognize some of the highlight reel ability that he has, and Kyler Murray has always had that level of talent. But I think sometimes what we don't recognize is the 3rd and 7 right before the huge scramble play but on the earned first down. But that 3rd and 7 where he hits McBride away from some tight coverage on a route, routes that are maybe similar to some of the things we'll do, or, watching him play with really, really good technique and fundamentals, either in the drop back game. The play action game can be done a lot of different ways, offset gun, pistol, and under center. He's pretty dynamic in the keeper game, the movement game, obviously with his natural athleticism. So, I see a lot of ways that we'll be able to continue the evolution and evolve our offense here in year 5. But
what is this place called?
The Biltmore.
We're at the Biltmore here at the NFL owners meetings in Phoenix, Arizona. Matthew Coller, Alec Lewis from The Athletic, and we just got done talking with Kevin O'Connell at the breakfast where all the NFC coaches were talking in a circle, and we got to fire some good questions at Mr. O'Connell.
You going to talk about my breakfast?
Well, it was a very underwhelming breakfast. It was unimpressive, but I didn't know that you wanted that to be public, that you only ate 3 slices of bacon and 2 melons.
It was 2 cantaloupes.
Cantaloupes. Okay, is that a melon?
That is one type of melon, absolutely.
I don't know if people specifically needed the type of melon that you had, but
it paints the picture more accurately. That's what I'm all about.
It gave us something to make fun of you about, which there's a long list.
Sure.
So why don't we dive into what we heard from Kevin O'Connell? I'm very interested to hear what you think about his commentary about the quarterback position, because I started the thing off by asking him about Kyler Murray and the idea of adjusting the offense to Kyler, and it seemed like his thought was, I'm not sure you're going to have to adjust it as much as people think. Like, what was your takeaway from his answer about adapting the offense to Kyler? Because he also didn't say that, we're not going to do anything when it comes to adding Kyler Murray to the mix.
Yeah, I think the point, it was a good way to start it off. And I think the point that he wanted to make and made it clear that that he wanted to use the time was anybody who thinks he can't play in rhythm or can't play from the pocket hasn't watched the tape. So I think that was where he wanted to start with that conversation, in the sense that he believes he can play from the pocket, he can play in rhythm, he can go through progressions. But to your point, that doesn't mean they aren't going to have to adapt in some ways. He mentioned a couple times the idea of shotgun, the offset gun, using the pistol. We've seen some of this in the past, but I think the way that I took his comment was, we believe he can play within the structure of some of our offense, but we also know that we're going to have to adapt a little bit and that he's going to have to adapt a little bit. But there is confidence with Kevin and this offensive staff that they can do that. And so that, I think that's where, if those who are listening to the podcast, you've been saying this probably for months. I think it's something that we've written a lot about in recent weeks. He mentioned, I did think it was important to note that he talked about Kyler being really dynamic and some of the keeper stuff on the move, and so I would not be surprised if we see a lot of that. So it was interesting. It wasn't anything out of the ordinary, but the point that he started with was, you can go through the film and find examples of him playing in the pocket, and that is something that they're pretty convicted about.
Yeah, what he said was, when it comes to the idea of him scrambling and making those plays, that those end up as the highlights most of the time. But when on a play-to-play basis, he is routinely converting a 3rd and 7 by throwing open his tight end or, playing from the pocket. And you've watched the film, I've watched the film. We've talked about it quite a bit on the show. That is very clearly the case under Jonathan Gannon over the last couple of years, that there was a change in how Kyler Murray played. I'm interested in just in general how they're going to manage the quarterback quarterback competition, because I think we would agree that it deserves finger quotes. It's not really, in my mind, a quarterback competition. But if you're Kevin O'Connell, you can't come out at the owners' meetings and say, hey, J.J. McCarthy, you might as well just pack it up right now because Kyler is our QB1. So he's sort of, in his comments here, doing this delicate dance of like, yes, we're going to really put a lot of consideration into Kyler Murray being our quarterback. But, hey, JJ's in the building as well. How do you think that he will manage it? And what did you make of when he was asked specifically about the quarterback competition, how he will manage the spring into the summer with these quarterbacks?
Yeah, I think like when probably the people listening, when you hear quarterback competition, your mind probably goes to like, what is the rep counts, training camp practices with those guys going back and forth and performing. Like, I think the point that he wanted to make today, and that I think is interesting, is when he talks about quarterback competition right now, it is like wanting to infuse the room with motivation and the belief that like the openness of it, the day-to-day work ethic of it can bring the best out of all the guys in the room. And I think part of why he's talked about the competition is to kind of say that last year, like there wasn't the motivating fuel behind each player to maximize themselves. And so they're trying to essentially, like I'd say, spark that motivational fuel within that room more than anything else. And then, yeah, I mean, he made multiple comments today where it was like, I know everyone wants to talk about the reps and everyone wants to chart threads. I mean, here's how I see it and how I expect things to play out. In the spring, it's a lot of routes on there, so you're going to see all three guys, Carson Wentz, Kyler Murray, J.J. McCarthy, throw into all different receivers, and most of them should be present for the offseason workouts. Then in training camp, I expect it to be a lot of first-team reps for Kyler. I expect there to be some first-team reps for J.J. McCarthy. Carson Wentz probably proved last year he doesn't need all of those reps to get by, and then you just evaluate things from there. But his idea of not going down the road and naming someone now, again, is to give that room motivational fuel for these guys to reach their potential, because I think that's one of the key characteristics of what he views as quarterback development: the competitiveness, the high tide lifts all boats, like all of that stuff. I think he feels is important, and it's something they didn't have last year, so they're trying to kind of reintroduce a lot of it.
And as true as that might be, I think Kyler Murray's going to take every single first-team rep when we get to training camp. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there is some element of mixing and matching 7-on-7s, of course. You're not going to have every single rep going Justin Jefferson from Kyler Murray, but I'm just not really buying anything that's said that this is a competition between anybody and Kyler Murray. Like, he is such an accomplished quarterback, and I know he hasn't won a Super Bowl and so forth, but I think that for public perception, he needs to have it be, we're pushing everybody. We're trying to get the most out of J.J. McCarthy. But I also don't buy that last year was actually a problem, that there wasn't another quarterback, Sam Howell, but there wasn't another quarterback pushing J.J. McCarthy. And if you need someone else in the room to push you, then what are we doing here? This is starting quarterback in the NFL. I think that that's something that sort of sounds good and it's convenient that we need these guys to push each other. But Murray is a proven NFL quarterback who they went out and got for a reason, so they could have him as their starting quarterback.
So two things I'm going to say. The first is, to the point you made about like how last year, it was interesting last year when they didn't sign Daniel Jones and it became Sam Howell. Then by the fall, a lot of the conversation coming from Kevin O'Connell was like, not having the veteran kind of stopgap has allowed him to find his leadership voice and all that. So you got that. But I'd say, Kyler Murray, and again, you say the accomplished quarterback. Like, I want people to go look at the numbers and the amount of passes and wins and games, all this. Like, he is vastly more accomplished than what J.J. McCarthy has proven at the NFL level. I would be stunned at this point if he wasn't the starting quarterback come week one. But I do think that the Vikings are going to do everything they can to maximize J.J. McCarthy with where he is right now. Now, it raises the conversation or the questions of how much can you really maximize guy if he's not having the reps, all this stuff. But I mean, I think two things. One, it's going to be about him proving that he is consistent every single day in the work habits and the way he shows up and the way he performs, all that stuff. And then, you know, can he use that time as trial and error for layering passes, for, you know, being able to adopt the footwork the right way? All that stuff's going to be interesting. But yeah, I mean, look, it's a lot of, you know, we want to have the competition. Kyler Murray doesn't come here if he doesn't believe that he's going to be playing week one. So, yeah.
Well, with J.J. McCarthy, the question is asked, you know, about how he's been doing in this offseason. And you had reported that they were optimistic about his work with John Beck. And
sure.
I think that's a more credible person to work with than who he was working with before. And I know he's done some work with Beck, but that's somebody who's worked with a lot of really good NFL quarterbacks. And then O'Connell told us that he's been back in the building working with their strength coaches. They're not allowed to be downstairs coaching. I'm sure if they winked across the room, the NFL might not know about it. But, you know, I'm just saying that he's back in the building and so forth. But the rest of the commentary on J.J. McCarthy was just very muted. I mean, there wasn't really a statement of, like, we think he's taking this next big step. We're really excited about X, Y, and Z. It was like, yep, he's back and he's there. I thought some of the more interesting was probably about Carson Wentz, because when they signed Wentz back, I thought the entire reason you do this is because you've gotten to QB3 twice in 4 years. So having a QB3 might actually be a little bit of a hack if you're a competitive team with how often quarterbacks get hurt. I got the impression from O'Connell that Wentz is here to break glass in case of emergency, and also he just really likes him. Like he likes his knowledge of the offense, how quickly he picked it up. He likes his experience, all that sort of stuff. But there's no real discussion of Carson Wentz like being in this conversation. Now, he might win quarterback 2. I think if we're talking about a competition, it's probably QB2 that I could see Carson Wentz winning that position.
Yeah, I mean, a couple things on that. The first, the optimism, I mean, you really can't, with J.J. McCarthy, you've seen a lot of positives on the practice field for multiple years now. And it's really like, until he's been in the fire and had to make decisions on the fly, and that stuff has gone poorly or great, like that's really, I mean, that's where you can establish the most evaluation from what he is. And again, that does bring the conversation of like, well, if he's not playing, then what do things look like? As far as Carson Wentz, I mean, yeah, like it felt to me when he was signed, everybody wants it to be this referendum on J.J. McCarthy and everything. And I get it in some fashion, but I'd also say, to your point, like they have had to turn to the third quarterback twice in the last 4 years. When they've done it, it's been guys that they don't have a ton of respect and not respect, excuse me. It's trust and belief in that those guys can really go out there and shine. So Carson and Carson's smart. Carson knows that Kyler Murray has played 17 games once in the last 5 years, and J.J. McCarthy has only started 10 games. So what is the probability and the likelihood that there are 2 injuries and that he is going to have to step in if that's how the depth chart looks? Like, it's probably fairly likely. So, I think that's the one thing with Kyler Murray that I don't know how much you've talked about in your show, but I do think is really important. Just like last year, I thought it was important to talk about the signings of Jonathan Allen and Javon Hargrave and Ryan Kelly. Like, it could be good with their talent, but the injury risk and the lack of like consistent being on the field is something that has to be discussed. It's really important to talk about. So that's kind of the vein that I view Carson Wentz in.
It definitely has to be considered when you're thinking about bringing in a QB3, and you actually can't do much better than Carson Wentz for a QB3 because almost all of them are undrafted free agents or late round picks or something around the league. I think it just so happens that this really works for him. Like, he's from relatively here. He grew up a Vikings fan, if you haven't heard that before. And the building, you know this. I mean, everybody who comes into this building and works with O'Connell and works with Josh McCown, who he's very close with, they end up enjoying that experience. And I also think if you're Wentz, you're probably saying, who is it that gets to play when the starter goes down? Is it the person with more talent at the moment or the person they trust more? And I think the person they trust more as of right now. Now, that's where JJ has to prove. He has to prove he can actually be trusted to run the entire offense, not a truncated version of it where you're jumping offside or you're trying not to false start 8 times in a game with too many motions or whatever, right? Like what it comes through loud and clear is Carson could run my offense. And that's what I want for somebody if Kyler were to go down. I want to shift gears though, because I want to ask you about the Jonathan Greenard situation where when Schefter puts it out there, I think all of us are like, dude, he's getting traded. But now my read on that situation is by the time we've reached Schefter tweeting it out, they've probably already done their first wave of trying to get someone to trade for Jonathan Greenard. And that is a bat signal to anybody who may have not noticed that they're trying to trade Jonathan Greenard. Hey, guys, we are still open for business. But I have been told day 3 picks are being thrown at them and not anything of substance for Greenard, because if you are on the other side of that, a new contract is what he wants. Didn't have the sack production for last year. He also is coming off of an injury that sounded, from what O'Connell said, like might limit him in the spring. That doesn't seem like something you trade a second-round draft pick for if you're on the other side of that.
Well, I mean, like, if you just take the player of Jonathan Greenard and the production, it's pretty clear how great of a talent he is, and it's not easy to find that level of production at edge rusher, regardless of the sack production, regardless of injury. Like, usually teams that are competitive and contending want to acquire players like that. The complication comes with the contract. Right. He, at this current value, there probably would be teams willing to trade some great stuff for it. But part of the reason that Schefter tweet exists is because he and Drew Rosenhaus, his agent, are pursuing an increase in contract, and the Vikings haven't been willing to do that and go down that road to that ultimate degree to this point. And so, being malleable with the player and the agent, the Vikings are like, look, if you can get what you want from another team and that other team is willing to pay us in draft capital, but what we feel like is worthy of asking for, then we'll listen. Other than that, like, we want to keep this guy we think is really valuable and important into our defense. And if that ultimately does happen, if Drew Rosenhaus, Jonathan Greenard can't find another team that's willing to trade the draft capital and pay him, then we'll see what happens as far as later in the spring, later in the summer, into training camp. Can they come to terms on some type of deal that makes sense for both sides? I think like that's the path that you're looking to go down, unless there is a team like a Philadelphia or like an Indianapolis that just decides like, you know what, we couldn't get our guy in the draft. This is our best option, so let's swing for it right now. That's kind of the nature at which I feel the situation is. When the tweet first comes out, everyone thinks, oh, it's really imminent. But the contract and the reworked contract has been a big hurdle the biggest hurdle for other teams and conversations that I've had, just like it was the hurdle here that led to the idea of trading him even coming to fruition in the first place.
Let me ask you a tough question here, because sharing your reporting versus your opinion is a thing on the Alec Lewis show that you got to navigate it. Most tilted toward reporting, whereas the Purple Insider is a little different. What is your opinion? Do you think that they should? Not will they? We don't know yet, will they? But do you think that they should trade Jonathan Greenard?
No, I don't. I don't think they should trade Jonathan Greenard unless you can get a first-round pick, which I don't expect them to be able to get. So I just think, again, the sack production in 2025 is what it is, but you look at all of the advanced metrics, and I like doing that, and I also like watching the film, and you look at pass rush win rate, you look at quick pressure rate, run stop rate, all of those numbers were higher than they were in 2024. I also think, yes, did Dallas Turner take a big step over the back half of the 2025 season? Absolutely he did. Can't wait to see how he builds on that in 2026, but to expect him to have the level of production Jonathan Greenard has, has is lofty, and I do think it's important on a defense where the only other, besides Andrew Van Ginkel, the only other reliable defensive lineman right now is Jalen Redmond. And so I just think he's too important to this defense, and this defense is too important to being competitive to move him for anything other than something real premium. So that's where I'm at. What is your thought?
So the minute that they got Kyler Murray, my thought was you really should not trade Jonathan Greenard, because what you're trying to do here is win. And if you had gone and gotten, say, I don't know, Marcus Mariota, and then really the story is you're trying to find out what J.J. McCarthy is and thinking a little bit now and later. Well, from a now and later perspective, it makes total sense to trade Jonathan Greenard because you get the cap space, you get the draft capital. We all agree this team has to be rebuilt through the draft.
No doubt. Rob
Brzezinski said it at the Combine. You can't just keep doing it this way where you have to luck into a Greenard, Van Ginkel, Stephon Gilmore shows up and plays really well. Shaq Griffin, like they hit the home run of all home runs
Cashman
in 1 year to build much faster than you thought. But like that doesn't happen all the time, as we learned from last year. So yes, it does make sense to get more draft capital, be in a better cap space situation down the road. But when you have this group all together, when you've kept TJ Hockenson, when you've kept Aaron Jones, they have not really gone full into, hey, the future is what we're looking at. It has been very minor as it pertains to that. It's like, a couple of defensive tackles that you couldn't really pay anyway. I mean, that's not we're going to really truly look toward the future. If they had gotten rid of TJ Hockenson, if they had gotten rid of Aaron Jones, then I would have said, yeah, I mean, they're on to 2027 and beyond. If they had gotten a mediocre fill-in quarterback, that's not what they did. They went and got someone who's had seasons in his career where he's every bit as good as Jordan Love, every bit as good as Jared Goff, or what Caleb Williams was last year. He can have those seasons. So if you're going to roll the dice and say, we got a quarterback that's top 15, that if it really clicks, you can actually win, do you want to be going into the trade deadline saying, oh man, now we have to trade a second round pick to go get somebody else's pass rusher? You're robbing Peter to pay Paul in that situation. Why not see by the deadline where you're at? If Kyler Murray gets hurt week 1 and they play Carson Wentz and you're 2-5 at the deadline, well then sure, trade Jonathan Greenard. It's not the last day that you can possibly do this, but I think you need him to win. I agree with, of course I agree with the metrics. I think last year was a lot of bad luck when it came to the sacks, but it does hurt how much a team would trade for him. So if you're not going to get the value, then just keep him, do everything you can to win right now and see how it plays out.
I think there's a couple things for me. People are always like, trade this guy, get a third round pick. I'm like, do you recognize the probability of hitting on a third round pick? It is like a 30% chance proposition that you hit on a starter in the third round.
Right.
So, and Howie Roseman says this all the time, we're not in the business of trading really good players away. And Jonathan Greenard is a really good player.
Yep.
He is. Now, just like with Kyler, the injury stuff with him has been a frequent theme within his career. Finishing as much as I just mentioned the advanced production, there's probably people here talking about how he didn't finish sacks. Yep. That is an important thing to talk about for 2026. But I think everything you said there is correct. If you were going to I think they've kind of with this offseason straddled the line in some ways of we just like they typically do under this ownership is we want to be competitive enough to get in the playoffs every year, but this offseason they also don't want to hamstring anything out in front of them. If they have to pay, let's say Kyler has a phenomenal year, they want to pay Kyler. If they don't want to pay Kyler, but they draft a bunch of guys and need to fill holes with free agents, they can do that. They have flexibility in the future, but part of the getting in the dance for 2026 includes having a Brian Flores defense that has been as good or close to as good as it's been. And I'm not sure you can do that if you don't have a guy like Jonathan Greenard in the mix. So again, it's going to be interesting to see if we get to training camp. Have they reworked the deal? Are they going to? What does that look like? I mean, I think, it's something we'll probably monitor through the draft and then beyond that.
Folks, as you know, Purple Insider is always growing and changing, and I'm looking to take steps forward in 2026, just like your business. Now, I'm lucky to have a great crew, but as a business owner, I am well aware of the challenges of trying to find quality people to add to the roster. So if you're hiring for your company in 2026, let me give you a little advice. Check out ZipRecruiter. With new goals in 2026, you may be looking to add to your squad, and thankfully, there's a place that you can go to help conquer these challenges and achieve your hiring goals. And right now you can try ZipRecruiter free at ziprecruiter.com/audio. This is not some run-of-the-mill job website, my friends. They have tools and data that separates them from the pack. ZipRecruiter's matching technology works fast to find top talent, so you don't have to waste your time and money, and you can find out right away how many job seekers in your area are qualified for your role. Let ZipRecruiter help you find the best people for all of your roles. 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter find a quality candidate within the first day. See for yourself. Just go to the exclusive web address, ZipRecruiter, and try it for free. ZipRecruiter.com/audio. That is ZipRecruiter.com/audio. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. All right, we got to go do some stuff. What other subject would you like to hit on? We got
the draft.
Oh, okay, the draft. All right.
Like, I just think this is a fascinating one for me. So what do you do at 18? And then all the positions you need. How do you hierarchy? Like, which ones are the most important? Which one are you spending number 49 on? Like, I think the draft for me is really interesting. This one's really interesting.
It's also interesting because it's being run by a general manager who's not yet officially the general manager, which I don't know has happened before. And Rob Brzezinski deserves all the trust. He's been in 100 draft rooms. He's seen it all.
He's gone to every draft meeting since he's been with the team.
And I did joke with him at the combine, like, hey, as long as you make the pick, then it's better than what happened with.
Yeah, I'm sure he loved that.
They got Kevin Williams out of it. All's well that ends well with missing the draft pick. But as long as you get that in there, then you're going to be fine. But I see it's like there's been this one opinion on who they should draft.
It's crazy to me.
Which is crazy. I mean, I started adding it up. Vikings.com did a good recap of all the mock drafts, and it was like 80% had one player, Dylan Thieneman from Oregon. And I just don't see it that way. And I said to you, after they talked about Darisaw today and where he's at, and it wasn't inspiring. It certainly was like not sound the alarms, like this is a big problem, but it also wasn't like, hey, you're crazy for asking this question. He's going to be perfectly fine forever for the rest of his career. It sent up a flare to me that if you picked edge rusher, it makes sense. If you picked offensive tackle, it makes sense. With even they haven't extended Brian O'Neill yet. If you pick wide receiver, I have and will continue to make a case for wide receiver.
It's your
once
favorite
again.
case to make.
Because it's right.
It's like the attorney that like is just a bread and butter case and it's their go-to.
Certain people made other cases for other quarterbacks outside of Kyler Murray. I stuck to that. But I could see so many different positions making sense. And this might be the first time in a very long time that you draft for 2027 and not right away immediate. This is what we absolutely must have right now.
Well, it's funny because someone asked me the other day, like, what is the deepest position group on their roster and what is the thinnest position group on their roster? And I was like, man, the deepest might be quarterback with what they've done, which is, I mean, that it would speak to the strategy being executed because that's what they wanted to do. But like thin, you could talk about, well, TJ Hawkinson is the final year of his deal. So tight end. You could talk about defensive tackle. Jalen Redmond, Levi Drake Rodriguez, Tyrion Ingram Dawkins, Elijah Williams. All those guys might have upside, but like, I don't know. None of them were really highly selected players. Cornerback, we could always talk about. Safety, what are you going to do at safety? Jay Ward will probably have a bigger role, but I mean, again, receiver. Lose Jalen Naylor, Ty Felton, you might have some optimism in, but you probably need receiver. Running back, Aaron Jones. I mean, like, you can literally go down the whole roster. So for me, again, like last year at 18, there was a lot of safety mocks. You saw a lot of Eamon Worry. And I felt really the whole time like guard made sense, interior offensive line made sense. And so with this one, and really compared to even the last 3 years probably, and I've only been covering the teams of 2022, like this I think has been the hardest for me to really peg, and I think that is because it would be sensible to go all different routes, and that makes it interesting to me.
I mean, if Spencer Fano dropped to the Vikings, I think you just have to take him, right?
I haven't ripped the tackle tape yet.
I think you have to.
I might, like Francis Mawanoa or something. I'm going to be, but no, like you could even argue like the Penn State guard.
Yeah.
Everyone loves that guy. If he falls to 18, you could argue like Will Fries, the year in 2025 was up and down. He played every game, but like you could argue maybe you replace that. You could draft a guard and move him to center. Like there's a lot of possibilities, and so that I think it's very. I keep saying it, like it's fascinating to me whether it should be or not.
Well, when you try to make an argument for guard, you could say that Will Fries' contract really only runs through next year. I mean, what it looks like on paper, 5 years, whatever, huge amount, that is just not what it really looks like when we look at the actual guarantees, what it would cost to move on, the dead cap. It's really much more of if he doesn't play well in 2026, which I thought he was fine this year. Right? It wasn't $18 million a year worth, but the cap hit goes way up, and you end up with a scenario where that does make sense. And that's my point about if you look 1 year into the future at almost any position, then you can make this argument hands down. Especially, make fun of me for wide receiver, but like we don't know what they want to do with Jordan Addison. And that was a question we, might be able to ask at a different time. But like we don't have that answer. And losing Naylor, it matters for the immediate. So I feel like this is the most wide open, and yet, well, go ahead.
No, I'll say this. Like, as far as the guard thing, I think, like, that would be pretty low on my list.
Yeah, that would be bold.
But, again, if a great player falls, that would be hard to pass up. But I would be pretty surprised if they don't come away from the 2025 draft with a center.
26.
With the receiver. 2026, excuse me. Whew. I mean, we're going through it here.
Out.
Receiver, center, potentially a running back.
I think they got to have a running back.
What other position? Defensive tackle, I would be pretty surprised by, and then safety probably. So, and then you're just talking about like what are the best players we can get at each range, and I think that's how you go about it. I mean, you know this about me. I've written about it in the past. Like I love trade downs because I think the probabilities just go up the more bullets you have to fire. So I know it didn't work in 2022 when Kwesi Adofo-Mensah traded down way too much for not enough, but in return. But like if the Vikings traded down from 18 to 25, picked up another day 2 pick, were able to get all these positions that you need. Like I'm not in. I don't hate that strategy at all. Fans might, but that's kind of my view of it.
I feel they almost have to if the offers are there. That is the trouble with this draft, though. Like, is there a player? But look, how it goes every single draft is someone drops and we don't know who it's going to be.
Right.
We don't know why it's going to be. There was it Will Johnson, who was supposed to be a top 15 pick last year.
Michigan corner.
We didn't know that he had an issue with medical situation. He drops into the second round. Like there can always be scenarios that play out. I think that acquiring as much draft capital as possible, that you shouldn't be scared off by. It's like, oh, don't draft another player from Georgia ever because that guy didn't work out. Like you just can't.
No.
You can't deal with a failure of the past. It's like blackjack. If you hit on 14 or something and went bust, you're never going to hit again on 14. Like, come on, you can't play it that way.
And I'm not always Mr. Data analytical guy. Sometimes I am, sometimes I'm not. But like the probability I think everyone gets so caught up in the emotions of the draft, but like you have to be very realistic of like what are the probabilities of these things. And I think you also have to talk about two things. One, where have the Vikings been best at developing players, and which coaches are the best at developing players? Because that's the other component of this that I think often goes way under discussed. The draft process is a two-pronged thing. It is selection and then development. And I think we focus always on the selection, but I think the part of this draft is going to have to be how do they maximize these players that they bring in? And again, it's not maybe the most headline-generating subject, but I'm not sure we talk about it enough. And some of the best staffs in all sports at all levels, like they maximize development. So it's something, I think we should talk about.
Alec Lewis, we're inside the owners' meetings at the Biltmore.
It's beautiful. We got like a rose garden right here. I mean, it's Mark Davis was walking by, the Raiders owner, like he just worked out or something. I mean, I got bothered by that.
We were just doing our little type-in right next to Drew Rosenhaus, and this is kind of weird. It's a weird scenario. It's almost like a fever dream where we're doing the same things we always do, just like going, reporting, writing on our little laptops, doing a podcast, and then just like McVay walks by, and you're like, wait, I don't know, like everybody's here.
I was just talking to Jordan Rodriguez, my colleague, and she's like, oh, she introduced me to this woman. I'm like, who was that? Les Snead's wife. Okay, like that's just how it kind of goes. So it's fun. It's a relaxed time of year. It's good. I think, again, this draft cycle is interesting. And I'm fascinated. Like, the fan perspective has been interesting to me, too. So the Dylan Thieneman, either everyone knows that the Vikings are going to do something, or everyone's just doing it because everyone else is doing it. And I would probably lean towards the latter being the case.
This time last year, I think a safety was probably the most mocked position, and that's not where they went. But if you're not drafting for direct need, or you directly need almost everything, then it opens the door a lot wider. Thank you for your perspective, sir.
Anytime.
And we'll see you back in Minnesota.
Looking forward to it.
It's golf season. Almost. Football.
Folks, just wanted to pause real quick and point out that over on FanDuel, there are a bunch of new options for the NFL draft, including odds all the way through pick number 6. One stuck out to me, though. There is odds for a team to draft quarterback Ty Simpson, and the Minnesota Vikings are listed at plus 1,900. That is the 6th highest odds to draft Ty Simpson. So here is the FanDuel question of the day. At what point in the draft would it make actual sense for the Vikings to pick Ty Simpson? Remember, we've seen a lot of quarterbacks that aren't drafted exactly where draft analysts think they're going to go. So at what point in the draft would it just make too much sense for the Vikings to take Ty Simpson? That's our FanDuel question of the day. Now back to the show.
All right, before we wrap up here from Phoenix and I fly back to Minnesota, let me answer a couple of questions that were sent to me on Twitter about the Vikings following our discussions with the head coach, the GM, and the owner. So Maz sends this one in. Let's say hypothetically, and unfortunately, they aren't considering a pass catcher at number 18, and Thieneman is gone, and Banks is medically off their board. No trade down to be had. Gut call, who's the pick? So after talking with Rob Brzezinski, it feels so wide open. It feels like there are many different positions that they could consider. And of course, the trade down you mentioned not being an option. It feels like if their first couple of guys are off the board and they're not taking our pass catcher that we want, then that would be something that they'd be looking into. But since that's your stipulation, I ran a draft sim just before trying to answer this to see who was on the board. And a couple of names that pop up. Jermod McCoy is one. I mean, corner makes a lot of sense for this team because when you look 1 year down the road, and it stuck out to me how often Rob Brzezinski mentioned 2027 as being a factor in their thinking. Sure, they have Byron Murphy Jr. and Isaiah Rodgers right now. Do they have them in 2027? I mean, if Byron Murphy Jr. plays the same way that he did this year, then that cap hit is going to be pretty hard to justify. And with Isaiah Rodgers, he's going to be a free agent. If he puts together a similar performance, then he's going to go elsewhere and get a pretty big contract, I would expect. Now, they might be able to extend him, but that's always a possibility of losing him in free agency if he has another good season. So cornerback is a now and later type of position where you could certainly use another one for depth. I don't think James Pierre at age 29 and having never played 400 snaps of defense is going to keep you from taking a first-round corner if you like that player. Avion Terrell is also another one. Colton Hood is another one that could be mentioned. So at least several guys in that ballpark. If they like one of them in particular, you could have a training year for that guy or their depth. I mean, who knows with corners? They do get hurt a lot, even though they've had some good luck in that area over the last couple of years. You never know, right? So if someone gets hurt, then you're throwing in the rookie right away. So it's automatic depth. And then longer term, normally when it comes to corners, that's like a lot of other positions, but you can find them for sure. It will cost you in free agency, but can you find the great ones? Can you find the guys that you have for 8 or 9 years? I think that's a lot harder. Usually those do come at the top of the draft. I know, like shocker, right? The best players are at the top of the draft, but corners are another position where teams rarely let them hit the market. Every once in a while, you'll see a Jalen Ramsey or even this Trent McDuffie. It was a deal that they couldn't turn down, the Kansas City Chiefs, but it took a lot to pry him away from Kansas City. So it's almost getting to be a little bit like that wide receiver discussion of it's hard to find the really good ones. You can find a lot of average ones, which is not true for wide receiver, but you cannot find the good ones unless you draft them. So I would go probably with Jermod McCoy out of Tennessee. Missed last year, but is a really, really good athlete, very physical, seems like he would be a fit for Brian Flores. But man, the number of options here, especially when we start to look down the road a little, would they think about a tackle? Would they think about a TJ Parker, the edge rusher out of Clemson, if he were available, or a Cassius Howell, if he were available? I also think, Peter Woods, the defensive tackle from Clemson, is very interesting here as well. I mean, this feels like I could go on with 5, 6, 7 different guys, which is why trade down is such a reasonable option. But it's a great question because this is probably the first year that, in a long time, where you could look at the draft board and you can't really whittle it down to, hey, they're either going to go with this position or that position. I think we had that last year with guard or safety. Those are the ways they're going. This year, I don't know about that, and I don't think that you spend the 18th overall pick on Emmanuel McNeil-Warren. I think that's much more of a second-round type of decision. So I did not really definitively answer your question, but I think corner would be the way I would be thinking with that. Graham sends this in. What's the score with Demetrius Washington and Ryan Grigson following Kwesi's departure? Will there be a shakeup in the Vikings scouting department? I think this is one of the biggest questions facing the Wilfs as they make this decision at general manager. If they haven't already decided to go with Rob Brzezinski, and then this is sort of a, I think it's a real GM search, but if they ultimately land on, we're comfortable with Rob Brzezinski, they're going to talk to a lot of different people, I would imagine, and cast a wide net. And if I'm a candidate, so let's just say that they're not going to go with Brzezinski, they're going to go with an outside candidate, and they're telling me, hey, we love you, we want you to be our GM, but we really want you to keep a lot of our people in place. Now, Washington and Grigson, that I don't know. It might depend on how they're viewed internally. If they're viewed as important people internally to the process, then they might stay, despite the fact that Kwesi did bring those guys in. But if you're a new general manager, I think one of the things that you want more than anything is, let me bring in my guys. And if it's an experienced person who's been in the league for a long time and has been at a high position for a long time, they're going to have people that they are comfortable with, scouting-wise, personnel-wise, that they want to put in those certain positions. Think about the Denver Broncos when George Payton got hired. He took some people from Minnesota out to Denver with him. That's how it usually works. The fact of the matter was, Kwesi Adofo-Mensah didn't have a lot of people. He was in San Francisco. They're going to keep their people. He was in Cleveland for a fairly short time, and then he brings Grigson with him. But it wasn't like he brought this army that he had built over 15 years in a high position in the NFL with him that he had picked up in a lot of different spots. And he was hired to come in and, it seemed, keep the same group. And if that's going to be the case with what they want from the next general manager, then I don't know where these two stand. Maybe they're highly regarded internally and they'll stay. If they are saying, hey, you have carte blanche to pick whoever you want for the front office, we'll revamp it if you want to, I wouldn't mind that. I think you want to give your new general manager as much power as they can and also not have to win over a bunch of new people, but rather come in with backing in their front office from the people that they are hiring. Or maybe there's kind of a mix and a mash. When it comes to the scouting department in general, I always get a little bit itchy when I talk about that because I think that there's a little bit of a maybe misunderstanding about how the scouting works. Oh, they failed on this many draft picks recently. There's no doubt that they did, and we've talked about that a lot. So they must have a problem with scouting, right? I don't think that that's actually necessarily the case. Now, it might be, but I don't think that it necessarily has to be because the scouts, they go out and they gather information. And they are looking for things that they're directed to look for from their coaches and their general managers. So here is your directive. Here's what you're supposed to go out and look for and find and get background information and gather. Some scouts have joked that they're private investigators as much as they are talent evaluators. And then you bring that information back to your coaches and your general manager, and they're the ones that make the decision. So you could have the best scouts in the world, and they could scout 50 potential first-round draft picks, and you still end up coming out with Lewis Cine because someone at the end of the day makes that decision. That's why I always brush back a little bit on, well, do they need a new scouting department? I honestly don't really know. Is it possible? Yes. But is the recent draft record a exact correlation to you must not have good scouts? That I would not exactly say, but this goes to if you have a general manager who does things a certain way and wants certain information from scouts, it might be easier to bring in some of your own people rather than trying to teach the old dogs new tricks, which I think Kwesi Adofo-Mensah was put at a disadvantage by having to do that when he got here. So I don't know how it's going to go. There might be no change at all, and it might be Rob Brzezinski. There might be a whole new front office that we see pretty soon. This question comes from Matt. Says, does the Vikings picking up Addison's fifth-year option affect the odds of them taking a wide receiver in the first round? Is the train running out of steam? Yes. I mean, I think that the odds of them totally agreeing with me on the first-round wide receiver were about as high as they were last year because they have Justin Jefferson, and at least for now, the next 2 years are guaranteed of Jordan Addison with his fifth-year option. I mean, I guess nothing's actually guaranteed because they picked up, George Pickens was a second-round draft pick, but so they didn't have a fifth-year option, but the Steelers traded him before his contract was up. So we have seen this where, the Vikings could always trade Jordan Addison if they weren't comfortable with where things stand. I would also argue, and I look at what the Tampa Bay Bucks did in drafting Emeka Egbuka, that sometimes you can't always anticipate what's going to happen next down the road, but more weapons is better for your quarterback. I'll continue to argue that, and having a weapon who's even a number 3 guy that catches 50 passes, who costs you $4 million, sounds like a great idea to me for a first-round draft pick, and that's someone who will enhance your quarterback for many years to come. You also can't guarantee, and I know this would have to be a total meltdown, everything else, but you can't guarantee that Justin Jefferson is totally happy with how things are going at the end of next year either. They probably won't think of it that way. They'll likely only draft a receiver when they need it down the road. But giving Addison a contract extension, that I think is something they cannot do. Fifth-year option made a lot of sense one way or the other because you pick up Jordan Addison's fifth-year option, it guarantees you that he's going to have a very reasonable price. And imagine if things go great for him and he catches 85 passes for, 1,200 yards. Well, instead of having to pay him $30 million right away, you get to pay him 17 to 20, whatever it's going to be for that fifth-year option. They're protecting themselves in that way and pushing a decision a little bit down the road. I get it. But yes, I think to your question, the dream is probably dead, but it's only dead for the first round. Second round does feel like linebackers, maybe a running back if Jadarian Price ends up there. Center, I guess if they really, really love one of these guys in the second round, it seems like they're going up and down in terms of their projections. Now it feels like most of the centers are being projected into the third round. But I think that wide receiver is going to happen because when you look at the roster right now, Ty Felton, a lot of you have questions about Felton. I do too. I think he has exciting speed and playmaking ability, but we just don't know yet. And we didn't know yet on KJ Osborne. We didn't know yet on Jalen Naylor. And both of those guys turned out to be very good wide receivers. The case could be true for Felton, or if they're not that confident, they might, or even if you are confident, you should just draft another one anyway in the third round. Because this receiving class, I think, has a lot of guys into the third round. Like we might see a receiver like Zachariah Branch, for example, very explosive wide receiver from Georgia, we might see him slip through the cracks. Or Skylar Bell from Connecticut might slip through the cracks. There's going to be one or two that end up, and I'm remembering Amon-Ra St. Brown being a 4th-round pick. Of a lot of people were projecting him higher, and it just nobody took him, and it worked out. So that might be what they do here. I think wide receiver should be on the docket, but when we start to go through these needs, the defensive tackle's a little bit more desperate right now. Center, I think you want to have somebody to train for an entire year. We just talked about cornerback. We've looked at the safety position. Running back is something that they might take in day 2. I think I almost have to take in day 2. So where does wide receiver fit into that? But do they have a plan for wide receiver 3? We saw the Vikings for years get away with Thielen and Diggs and not really have a wide receiver 3 option. But can they do that now in this offense? And they don't have a fullback at the moment. Huge factor in their potential success. But they don't have a fullback. How it's going to play out will be very interesting of where you add a receiver, because I do think that it's necessary, even if they sign somebody like DeAndre Hopkins. One more from Rob says, I do believe that Kyler Murray can run an offense that will be much better than last year in the 10 to 15 range. However, I have real concerns about Cashman, Van Ginkel, Wilson, all being critical to the success of the defense. And the first 2 always miss time in a given year. Talking about Cashman and Van Ginkel, they are all over or near 30. If there is regression, no matter how much of a wizard Brian Flores is, the defense will take a step back. Is this really a roster that can compete in the NFC? Even a great draft won't really bear fruit until 2027 or 2028. Well, a great draft might not bear its full fruit, but you might get players who are contributing. So, for example, 2015, they draft, and I know I go to the best draft they had in 20 years or whatever, but just for example, they draft Eric Kendricks, they draft Stephon Diggs, and those guys contribute right away. They weren't the full versions of themselves. So I think that you can get contributors right away on the defensive side. Even Dallas Turner, for as little as he played, still had a couple of key plays as a depth player in 2024. But to your point, it does feel like, they are a teetering or rickety on the defensive side because of the age, because of the injury history of some of these players, that you are one injury away. But I would also look around the NFC North and say that the same thing is kind of true for a lot of other teams in the NFC North. It's definitely true for the defense of Chicago that didn't improve anywhere near as much as I thought it was going to. And Green Bay, they lost Micah Parsons and fell completely apart. They're not even starting next season, more than likely, with him. And on the defensive side of the Lions, it feels like every year they lose half their team to injuries. I do agree, though, in terms of being a legitimate, serious Super Bowl contender, they're going to have great injury luck, unless they can find a handful of players. But here's what I would maybe compare it to is, in a worst case scenario, it might look like it did in 2023. When you go back through that 2023 roster and look at some of the players that they were playing a fairly significant amount of time, you'd kind of go, wait a minute, that defense was pretty good, actually. It was not great, but it was pretty good. And if you can be in the ballpark of a top 10 offense and in the ballpark of a top 10 defense, that puts you in the conversation. I think you need better than that on one side of the ball, if not both, to be a serious Super Bowl contender. But last year, they were in games where they had lost a lot of their players. I think the depth is even a little more shallow this year, and your point is correct. But Flores has always seemed to find a way to hang in there, to give his team a chance, and you might have a meltdown game like they did against the Chargers. But overall, even when they had a rough go at it early in the season with all the injuries, they were still pretty competitive on defense and needed some help on the offensive side. It is a little bit of putting that trust in or faith in Brian Flores that he can figure out some ways to get the most out of some guys, to squeeze on the scheme. And then when they play great quarterbacks, it'll probably collapse. That's just the reality if you end up with injuries. But we've sort of run to the point in this roster build that this is how it has to be. They've stacked up these players who are veterans. Some of them do have injury histories. And now you're at a point where this is it for this group. And I think it really speaks to 2027 beyond, why they need to stack draft capital, why they need to find younger players and have a future plan, because you're right that some of those guys might not be here longer term. So is it a concern? Oh, yeah. I mean, it's absolutely a concern. But I also, when it comes to talking about injuries in March and April, I just always have a tough time with that because, well, we don't have depth. I don't know who really does. I don't know what team has tons of great depth that they're rolling out there on a week-to-week basis. As of right now with the starters, I think this is a top 10 defense. Can they add some contributors somewhere, maybe in June or wherever else, that could beef it up a little bit more? But I think as long as they have most of the core players that they've had these last couple years, we can project them to be pretty good. It's just what degree of good is the big question. One more that I got. Let me see here. This was from Wakaba. Sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. Interested to hear some of your thoughts on the latest PFF news. So, as you guys know, I wrote the book, Football is a Numbers Game, which was about the history of Pro Football Focus. And feel free to get it on Amazon. And it came out at the owners' meetings on Monday, that PFF is selling its data collection side, which is the side that works with NFL teams, to a company called Teamworks. And Arif Hassan reported it was somewhere in the range of $100 million or something in that ballpark. And they also laid off a lot of the people on their content side that you might know. And it's unclear exactly what is going to happen to the side that puts out the premium statistics that we use so much and all that data that we discovered that Kyler Murray actually was under center quite a bit and, things like that, right? So it's unclear what's going to happen to that. And a lot of people, unfortunately, lost their jobs. In my book, I laid out the potential track for this to happen. And it's a complicated road that it took to get to this point where PFF was selling and where people were losing their jobs and things like that. I would just say that it's really unfortunate because it could have been prevented by taking a different route with the company. And instead, some of the decisions that they made and risks that they took led them to this point. And I also wonder very much about the future of the PFF data collection side, because I think grading is something that teams are interested in and they want to know for sure how their players are being graded. And Kwesi Adofo-Mensah told me that the Vikings use their grades as a comparison tool to look at, hey, if there's somebody grading a player this well, then and we're not, like, what's the difference or things like that. I know of other teams who certainly will say publicly that they never look at them. No, I would never. And they absolutely do. And their analytics departments do. And they present them in meetings and things like that. I don't know where that's going to go. But I do know that AI can do a lot of the things that really made PFF so popular, which is tendencies. I mean, it was a total game changer to have people tracking coverages and different situations and personnel groupings and motions and all these things that coaches could look up in an instant. And then when they paired it with the video, that's when it totally blew up behind the scenes in the NFL, and every team was using it like crazy. But AI might end up changing how all of that is done, and it might be able to use tracking data to paint the same pictures as PFF has been able to do. So I feel very sad that the company has kind of gone this way, and I'm extremely curious to know where analytics go from here, because it's mostly been a lot about PFF, and they really changed the way we look at football with a lot of data that they gathered and studied over the years. And wish for the best for the people who lost their jobs and the people who are still working for them as well. So there you go. All right. Anyway, this is me from the owners' meetings here in Phoenix. Got to go catch a plane back to Minnesota, and we'll have all week to break down a lot of different stuff that was said by the Vikings head coach, owner, and general manager. And it is now draft freaking season, everybody. We're all in. All right. We'll see y'all very soon. Football.